He sent this creation out into the plane that had attached itself to his own, and looked around, taking it all in, and discovering that the denizens of this plane could not detect that it was not of their own magic. It walked among them, seen but not sensed as an intruder, merely one of their own. Even the daemon overlord itself seemed not to notice. He tried to create another, but found that he could not. He kept on trying, but eventually tried to create something else he had encountered, one of the hosts he had slain. This worked, and it felt, sensed, and to all intents and purposes was the same as the original. The only thing was that it had no knowledge that he did not gift it, and it had no instinct or thought that it did not have before it fell. He experimented while his lesser form walked the plains, gathering information and absorbing magic from each new place it went, and discovered that whatever he created, even though these duplications were of the hosts themselves, he could only produce one of each of them, and they could do nothing that he had not witnessed or been exposed to himself, or by their absorbed experience. They were merely shadows of their former selves, even though they had their raw power, should he desire to gift it back to them. This testing of his powers of creation garnered attention from the attached plane, and more demons were sent to investigate, and each time they came, they were taken, absorbed, duplicated, and sent back. This continued for many years, which is a blink of an eye for demonkind. Eventually, he had control of almost all of the demonic forces of the plane next to his, and he chose to leave his host creations on his current home to act as guardians and bait for more demonic scouts, and pass through the portal to the demonic realm that was now mostly of his own puppets. He sensed the demonic overlord immediately and drew a breath of the magics of this realm, gaining a sense of direction, intent, and power of this creature. It sensed him, and the realm itself twisted and erupted forth a large and powerful manifestation of raw physical power. He stood there and studied it, the size, the power, taking it all in. The threads of magic told him exactly what abilities it had, as well as their lethality towards himself. He smiled as it charged him, and he let it hit him head on. It slammed into him and he gave no ground. The overlord ripped at his form, twisting itself around him, wrapping the very plane itself around, enveloping him with its raw power, and still he allowed it. He wanted to see how they fought, how they reacted, and how they drew their power from their realm, which itself was directly a part of their own immense power. After an hour or more of study, he grabbed it by the massive misshapen head and held it fast, looking directly into its eyes and smiling as he let a portion of his demonic power out to touch this prey. The daemon reeled in panic. It had never known fear, but now it knew, and squirmed and thrashed, trying to escape, but it could not. However, instead of fighting back, it began to shed its power from its main form, creating myriad of lesser forms, and they scattered around the realm as fast as they could travel. But he just fed, savouring the taste of his own kind, and bolstering his own abilities. It was strange, as this demon had its own abilities, and yet he could not fathom his own. All he had seemed to have was the ability to create what he saw, what he was exposed to, and then absorbed. Soon these demonic energies became his, and he too was able to perform the tricks and powers that it had had. But it was a hollow victory. It had stood no chance at all. But this meant that the others would also fall in his wake with ease. He enveloped the remaining running essence as they tried to escape, the remnants of the power of the Overlord. He then drew in the magical energy of the realm itself, as this contained the remaining essence of the Overlord, thereby wiping it from existence. He left enough to stand upon next to the portal back to his home, and started to exude his own raw demonic energies into this plane, bolstering what was left, and moulding it to his own design, his own essence. It was, after all, merely threads of magic, and all the things within a demonic plane, be it daemon, land, air, or creation, all bore the same markings. He turned his attention to the realm he stood within and concentrated, and found he could shape the land, move the magic, pull it into himself at will. He moulded the realm to the size of a small town, and populated it with a myriad of misshapen demons that he had drawn into himself in his conquest. He had absorbed his first demonic plane, and he felt somewhat content with his first victory, even if it was hollow. It was the start of many more to come, and the beginning of attention from the rest of the daemons. Before long, the war he waged upon the plane slowed, as many daemons pulled their planes away from his, and ensured he could no longer tear their threads of existence into his own make-up. During this onslaught, however, he managed to devour dozens of the daemon overlords, taking their home planes and increasing his powers many times over, before they realized they were drawing back. He let them go, and turned his attention to the primes. Slowly, he practiced reaching out across the planes he had in his command, but found that over time, as they were essentially the same magic, they drew toward each other, gravitating to their own kind, and began to coalesce into a single, gigantic plane. Using his knowledge of existence, the gift he was given by Chrylsis when he was with the host, he positioned this subverted plane around a prime, and let them draw together so they pushed upon that prime, and in time forced a connection through which he could send his power. It was the start of his own incursions onto the primes, and his first arrival was met with almost no resistance, but instead led quickly to the demise of the poor creatures that dwelled there, as he drew them into himself and created duplications of them to inhabit this prime. He would use this in future times as bait for other daemons, and he discovered that he could not sense the difference between the originals and the duplications, other than his own unique threads making up their existence in place of their pitiful souls. A dark essence instead residing within them, but even trained eyes, he would discover, only supremely gifted entities could detect his presence, but he would not find this out for quite some time. So he stood, with a prime now to his name, as well as a fallen prime, now the one and only true daemonic prime, his true home and residence of his anti-hosts. To this he held the growing power of a vast demonic plane, his staging ground for assaults upon the rest of daemonkind. Yes, he had what he needed to begin his campaign of growth, of power, and set about using his taken daemonic powers and knowledge to open minute rifts into as many primes as he could. The rifts were imperceptible to all but the most magical of creatures, and he waited to see what would happen, using them to feel the edges of these places tentatively, to gauge the level of power, the gradients of magic flowing through them, and identify the connections to that which he had touched. He used this information to judge where he was in relation to the other places he had witnessed when he had seen the map of existence itself, but discovered that Chrylsis had not been idle while he had been locked away. He had in fact moved the map somewhat, tipping the scales in the favour of the primes, drawing them away from his reach. But he had underestimated his cunning and his power, and so he began to map the newly arranged existence as well as he could. In his spider-like webs of magical threads that spread out from this devastated prime, he discovered beings of great power, some rivaling that of some of the demonic ones he had taken into himself, and he began to watch and learn. He saw immense creatures of scales and beings of elemental stone, formed of the elemental energies of those planes themselves, living and existing in harmony upon some of the primes. He had to see these creatures, to touch them, to feed upon them, to be able to create them. And so he turned his attention to one of the primes that held some of these fantastical creations, and watched them intently with wonder, but most of all, with hunger.